So it's reporting now, and thanks for everybody for my first meeting. If I forget anything or I've forgotten to do something, please just let me know, and hopefully we'll be okay tonight. So, floor is yours.
All right, thank you very much. All right, well, I call to order the February 11th, 2021 meeting of the Fairfax County Architectural Review Board. To conduct this meeting wholly electronically and to effectuate both emergency procedures authorized by FOIA and the Freedom of Information Act and the emergency ordinance, this board needs to make certain findings and determinations of record. It's a bit cumbersome, so I ask you in advance for your patience. First, sorry, I'm making sure I'm not muted. First, because each member of this board is participating in this meeting from separate locations, we must verify a quorum of members is participating, and that each member's voice is clear, audible, and that an appropriate volume for all other members. Accordingly, I'm going to conduct a roll call and ask each of the board members participating in this meeting to state your name and location from which you're participating. I ask that each of you pay close attention to ensure that you can hear each of your colleagues. Following this roll call, we will vote to establish that every member can hear every other member. So first, Ms. Aubrey.
Yes, this is Michelle Aubrey. I'm in my home in Alexandria, Virginia, and I can hear you and Nicole. So far, so fine. Thank you.
All right, Mr. Burns. Mr. Burns, can you hear us? You appear to be muted.
I just unmuted. Are you there?
John, are you there?
Yeah, I am here. Apparently pressing the space bar does not work on this software. But anyway, yes, I am here. I'm in my living room, and I can hear everyone so far just fine.
All right, as it should be obvious, I'm here from my home in Reston. Samantha Huang.
Yes, this is Samantha Huang. I am at my Reston home. I can hear everyone clear.
Great. Thank you, Samantha. Mr. Kalinsky.
Good evening, everybody. This is Steve Kalinsky. I am in my office in Alexandria, and so far I could hear everybody fine.
All right. I was notified by Ms. Murray that she would not be attending today. Do we have Ms. Notkins on the line? All right. Hearing no reply at this time, I'll move on to Ms. Orr.
Hi. Welcome from sunny Venice, Florida. I can hear everyone fine.
Thank you, ma'am. I do not see Mr. Plumpy on here, but Joe, if you're there, please speak up.
I don't see him yet.
All right. Mr. McReynolds, are you with us? Absent at this current moment as well. However, Mr. Zellman, are you here?
I am present. I'm at my home in Burke, Virginia, and I hear everybody just fine.
All right, thank you, sir. So John, just for some clarity, I found out that if you have the WebEx window clicked on, you can use the space button to mute and unmute yourself. But if you've picked open any other window, it won't work anymore. At this point, I will pass the virtual gavel to our vice chairman so that I may be heard to make a requisite motion. I move that each member's voice may be adequately heard by each other member of the board.
Is there a second to that motion?
Second.
All right, I got a second. All those in favor of the motion, please say aye.
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 All opposed, please say nay. Motion carried.
All right. Need for an electronic meeting. Second, having established that each member's voice may be heard by every other member, we must next establish the nature of the emergency that compels these emergency procedures. The fact that we are meeting electronically, what type of electronic communication is being used, and how we have arranged for public access to this meeting. Therefore, I move that the state of emergency caused by COVID-19 pandemic makes it unsafe for this board to physically assemble and unsafe for the public to physically attend any such meeting. And that as such, FOIA's usual procedures, which require the physical assembly of this board and the physical presence of the public, cannot be implemented safely or practically. I further move that this board may conduct this meeting electronically through a dedicated telephone line, and that the public may access this meeting by calling. And Nicole, I do not have that number.
My apologies, 1 second. It is on the agenda. Nope, sorry. Yes, the number WebEx support is 1-866-779-3239.
I'm calling the number stated by Ms. Brenham, so it is moved.
And also
Oh, go ahead, Nicole, I'm sorry.
we also need to do the motion for the quorum.
Okay. All right, well, there's a motion pending. Is there a second to that motion?
I can second.
All right, there's a second. I believe that was Ms. Orr. All those in favor, please say aye.
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 And all opposed, please say nay. And the motion carries.
All right, just a moment. I'm going to go to an older version of this. So I did not have that quorum one on mine, the one you gave me.
Yeah, I realize. I'm sorry. That was the document that was in the folder, so I just assumed that was the up-to-date one.
It's all right. It's all right.
My apologies.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. I count 7 of us. So as well as determined by the roll call, 7 members of the ARB are present and therefore satisfy the quorum minimum. ARB bylaws state that a minimum of 6 members are required to determine a quorum. So it is moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
I'll second.
All right, we have a second. All those in favor, please say aye.
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 Opposed, say nay. Motion carries.
All right. Finally, it is next required that all matters addressed on today's agenda are statutorily required or necessary to continue operations and the discharge of this board's lawful purposes, duties, and responsibilities. It is so moved.
All right, it's moved. Is there a second?
I
Sure,
second.
second.
A second from Ms. Wong. Thank you. All those in favor, please say aye.
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 All opposed, say nay. And the motion carries.
Finally, the ARB needs to determine how long each member of the public will be able to speak during public comment periods. The public will be allowed to comment after the consent agenda items after each action item as a standard ARB practice. I move that each member of the public will have 3 minutes to speak.
All right, there's a motion. Is there a second?
I'll second it.
I'll second that.
All right, many seconds. All those in favor, please say aye.
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 All opposed, say nay. And the motion carries.
All right.
And I return the virtual gavel to the chair.
Thank you, Mr. Vice Chairman. All right, now that the meeting is in effect, we can begin with any other virtual WebEx information that needs to be shared by staff. Nicole, is there any additional information that needs to be conveyed?
So I just want to inform all attendees that the meeting is being recorded and it will be posted online in 10 days. If you have any questions, please use the Q&A box or the chat function for inquiries, and staff will monitor accordingly. And again, if you're experiencing any technical issues, please call WebEx technical assistance at 1-866-799-3293.
All right, and next we begin every meeting once we've gotten through all the fun virtual meeting stuff with the statement of purpose and intent of historic overlay districts, and Ms. Aubrey has graciously agreed to do that for us.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I also, before I begin, I would like to thank you for getting through all of the preliminaries in less than 15 minutes. So, the statement of purpose and intent of historic overlay districts. Historic overlay districts are created for the purpose of promoting the general welfare, education, economic prosperity, and recreational pleasure of the public through the perpetuation of those general areas or individual structures and premises that have been officially designated by the Board of Supervisors as having historical, cultural, architectural, or archaeological significance. Regulations within such districts are intended to protect against destruction of or encroachment upon such areas, structures, and premises, to encourage uses which will lead to their continuance, conservation, and improvement in a manner appropriate to the preservation of the cultural, social, economic, political, architectural, or archaeological heritage of the county, to prevent creation of environmental influences adverse to such purposes, and to assure that new structures and uses within such districts will be in keeping with the character to be preserved and enhanced. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Albury. So next item on the agenda is the approval of the agenda. We have a rather light agenda in comparison. I look for a motion to approve it or provide any additions if anyone wishes to provide any.
I make a motion, we approve it.
All right, hear a motion to approve it. Ms. Orr, is there a second?
I
I
second it.
second.
Seconded by Mr. Burns, just barely beating Ms. Swan. All those in favor indicate by saying aye.
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 All those opposed, nay. Hearing none, the agenda passes unanimously. Nicole, do we move on to introductions and recognitions of guests? Do we have any introductions or guests that we need to recognize?
Tonight, we just have representatives from Traceries that are here, and they'll be presenting shortly.
All right, we have no consent calendar items, no items for action, and no items for workshops. So we move immediately on to our presentations. And our first presentation of today is going to be by Traceries regarding our historic overlay design guidelines. I believe we're going to be getting an update on the overall design guidelines, as well as the Bull Run Stone Bridge, as well as some discussion on the SULLY design guidelines as well. So I turn it over to Traceries. The floor is yours.
Great, thank you so much. And we're so lucky to be the only item on your agenda tonight. So I'm looking forward to this discussion. Let me just pull up my presentation. Okay. No. Okay, there we go. So hi, Sarah Vonish with Traceries. I'm joined tonight by Catherine Wallace, Ben Walker, and Laura Hughes, I believe, is on or will be joining. And we've all been working on the updated design guidelines. So the agenda for tonight is to review the revised overall design guidelines, the Bull Run Stone Bridge design guidelines, and then the drafts for Sully and Drainsville. So I have a slide between each one for questions and discussion, unless you want me to save those for the end, but it might just be helpful to go
No,
on.
I think I agree, Sarah. I think it makes sense that once we get through each one of them, we would have a stop and talk for a little bit.
Okay.
I think that's a lot of information to hold in our heads for each segment.
True. All right. So overall design guidelines. I'm just going to go through the overview and the contents really quickly, since you've seen them already, and then just talk about the edits that have been made since the last draft in response to the comments that we received. So first chapter, introduction to the county's historic overlay districts, including a background, the purpose, and the basics, just how they're established and designated, the boundaries, including the district core and the overall boundaries, property classifications, historic contributing and non-contributing, and then just an overview of character defining features and what that means. Chapter 2, Project Review and Historic Overlay Districts, Introduction to the ARB, types of projects that require design review, the ARB review process, including an overview of informal versus formal review, and then a procedure flowchart. We also included an updated submission checklist, simplified based on the comments that we received, and some example submission materials just to help applicants visualize the level of detail that you're looking for. Sorry for the bad, it doesn't look very good on my screen, the bad quality, but here's some updated images from the document. We received some comments on the review procedure and its legibility. So we tried to make that a little bit more clear. Hopefully this helps. Again, the submission materials checklist, just refining and making it a little more simplified. And then here are the examples from the Lorton Prison project. And we included a site plan, elevations, and then a section, I believe. So going on to the ARB standards and design principles, it includes an introduction to these standards and what the ARB is looking for. An introduction to the Secretary of the Interior standards, and specifically the standards for rehabilitation, as those are what's used to review the projects, obviously. General approach to planning a project, kind of outlining the general approach, preserve, repair, replace where necessary in kind, and going from there. Just some background on preservation incentives, and then the design principles and guidelines. So, and you can see all of them on the screen. I don't need to read through them. And here are some of the updated images in the document. We added a lot more illustrations throughout, and we've started to update the illustrations to help applicants understand some of these principles. So right now we have symmetry and asymmetry and the massing. So we'll continue to update the others as we go. We should have those, within the next month or so to plug in there. But visually rich with photographs and images from the HODs as well. So the edits that have been made, in text, we received just some specific text comments and revisions from ARB members, so those have been made. We removed the column format for just a single column, just to improve legibility, I think. Images and captions, we revised captions. Some of the ARB members noted some were confusing, so they've all been reviewed and edited. We removed the caption numbers just because the numbering was getting a little funky. We made sure to include images of all HODs. The classifications, we brought back in the contributing versus historic versus non-contributing, and brought back in the district core boundaries as well as the overall boundary. And as I mentioned, we updated the description of the types of work and submission checklist, flowchart, as we saw, and the sample project sheets. The design principles we separated by page. That was a comment we received just to give a lot more information on the principles and a lot more visual illustrations. So I think that's a little bit more clear now. That's all I have on the overall updates. I have the documents. I can pull them up if there are any specific questions or issues that you guys want to discuss, but I'll pause there before we go on.
I think what we'll do to keep things sane and organized is I will go around the horn alphabetically and have folks chime in based on what you've seen submitted in the presentation so far. So Ms. Aubrey?
Thank you. I actually have not read this particular set yet. I mean, we just got them within the week, and I have read the Sully and I have read Drainsville, but I haven't read, and I've read Bull Run, but I haven't read any of the others. So I'll have to withhold my comment. But I will say, just based on her presentation, it looks like it is a far cry better than what the first edition was. So thank you for all of the effort that's been made on trying to improve the document.
All right, Mr. Burns.
Yes, I had a couple of comments. Like Ms. Aubrey, I have not read through all of them, and so some of these comments are derived from my relatively close inspection of the SULLY guidelines. But having looked at this, I realized some of my SULLY questions will apply, I think, more broadly. And the first one is the aerial photographs. The SULLY aerial photograph does not include Dulles Discovery 4. And I'm just wondering how up to date are the aerial photos? Because we've already reviewed and approved Dulles Discovery 4. It's under construction, if not already complete. So that was the question came from there.
Okay. Well, I do have them just in a couple slides, so we can look at it together. But the latest aerial is from 2019.
Okay. All right. So that
and those
was,
can be updated.
Right. That was one question. A second question came, and I see it actually in one of your slides right here, the photograph in the lower left. All of the photos you guys took in last August are digital, I presume. Is that correct? Okay. And it's relatively easy to correct for perspective distortion with digital photography. And it's, you notice it, I see it in the Woodlawn one, but more dramatically in the cover of the SULLY presentation. So it would be a good idea, I think, to do perspective correction when you have some pretty significantly distorted images in the presentation. Then also, if you could go back to slide 10 of your presentation. There, thank you. The illustration of a house that is out of scale versus consistent with the prominent scale. That's not a house, that's an apartment building. Mm-hmm. I think maybe there what you really should put in is a McMansion.
Okay.
You know, with a dunce cap roof, you know, really steeply pitched roof, because that's the reality that we are often dealing with is a house that's out of scale, not a different type of building.
Problem is, John, if we did that, it would eat up 3 of those houses, wouldn't it?
Well,
we did one of the Great Falls ones.
Well, what you could do is you could obliterate 2 of those houses and have a McMansion bridge over 2 lots.
I think we can make that work. I think that's a good suggestion.
Yeah, it's best to stick to the same building type.
Yep, you're right.
But other than that, I commend the changes. I endorse what Ms. Aubrey said is a significant improvement over the last thing. You didn't have it here, and I'll bring my next question up at the SULLY presentation. I have a series there, but thank you.
All right, thank you, Mr. Burns. Ms. Swan?
Mr. Chairman, I do not have a comment for this round.
All right, Mr. Kolinsky.
Just that it's much improved. I don't have any specific comments. I do support what John said, but very much improved. Thank you.
All right, Ms. Orr?
No comments.
All right, Mr. Zellman.
The only comment I would make is it just seems much more user-friendly to me. I think there's some good information that applicants will have on the front end that will help them out and hopefully get approved more quickly. So I think it's good work. Thank you.
All right, and I see Mr. Plumpy is here. So, Joe, did you have any observations on the updated overall guidelines?
What I saw when I chimed in late is that it looks great. Pictures say 1,000 words, and WebEx is not great. So that's all I'm going to say. Thank you.
All right, and I guess just like many of the other folks, I've had a chance to peruse it, but I haven't had a chance to deep dive into it. I do think I did not think the columns bothered me, and I did not make that comment, but I actually like it much more without the columns. It definitely does make it more user-friendly. I agree the graphics, increased size for the graphics is going to be very helpful because I have a feeling that's part of what we're going to use this to point to. I assume we have a strategy for Holland Hills because I would like to point out that Holland Hills is not an overlay district yet. It may very well be one, but we have a few pictures of Holland Hills in here. And so I hope we have like substitute photographs were the circumstances to change and it is not elected to be an overlay district. I don't want to come across as being presumptuous, and so maybe that's part of the reason I'm just going to say that out loud, that I appreciate the proactive suggestion, because those are going to be some excellent photos and be very helpful if it is selected to be an HOD. But if it is not one, we don't want to paint ourselves into a corner there with pictures of buildings that aren't there.
Yes. Oh, sorry, a dog jumping on me. No, you're right. We have plenty of pictures. We can sub those out if that were to happen. So no problem.
Great. It's just the bureaucrat in me making sure that that's stated clearly and loudly. All
It's
right,
understandable.
well, let's move on to your next item then.
Okay, and before I move on, I maybe if for 30 days you could, if you guys have additional comments, you could email them to Nicole, and she can forward them on to me.
Sure,
but
I was
just if
going to
you
make
have
that a topic of conversation we got to the end.
Okay.
When did you want all the feedback?
right, we
But
can
if
get to it at the
if
end.
30 days is enough on all the items, then I think that, I mean, that seems very reasonable from my perspective to ask everybody to get stuff back to you, and email them all on to Nicole. Okay.
Well, I'm flexible, so we can talk about it at the end though to see
Okay.
what the right time frame is. Okay, so going on to Bull Run. This is first district specific design guidelines. I'm going to go through the outline and content for this, and then for the later ones, I haven't gone through in as much detail the content, but we'll get there. So Bull Run. Chapter 1, and this is consistent for all the HODs and potential HODs. Introduction to the design guidelines, introduction to the historic overlay district, and the regulations and project review, and it kind of points back to the overall design guidelines document, and hopefully will be linked together in the future, the near future. And then just an overview on using the design guidelines for applicants. Chapter 2, history and significance. They all include a statement of significance, development history and timeline, visual timeline, and they all include those aerial photographs. Chapter 3, overview of the HOD, including maps and photos, including views within the HOD. We have a section on new development and the development potential within the HOD, the zoning, the boundary, including the overall and district core, the resource inventory, and the summary of district character, which outlines the character defining features in that district. Chapter 4, design guidelines, preservation objectives, what the guidelines can and cannot do, and that's also consistent throughout the HOD design guidelines. And then a reminder of the Secretary of the Interior standards for rehabilitation. And we have, it's broken up into 3 sections in each HOD, the guidelines for preserving setting, topography, landscape, and archaeology, guidelines for preserving architectural character, and in this case, it's only the stone bridge really in it. And then guidelines for architectural compatibility for new construction and new additions. So these are the existing design guidelines that have been reworded to fit with what the board was looking for a less prescriptive and more consistent with the Secretary of the Interior's guidelines with recommended and not recommended for all those sections. So edits based on the comments that we received. Again, we had specific text recommendations and revisions that we made. The column format, we incorporated those historic aerial photos, incorporated additional maps, including a map showing the topography and some of the water features and other natural elements within the HOD. The text has been coordinated between Bull Run, Holland Hills, and all of the district-specific design guidelines. Just working with the work group and the ARB representatives there and making sure that just everything's consistent. Added references to the Bull Run Stonebridge document, including the designation report, National Register nomination for Manassas for Bull Run. And it does reference the 1991 contributing resources memo and the existing design guidelines, but just notes that this largely replaces the existing design guidelines. More image and caption and the property classifications. So those are the primary edits that have been made. So again, questions, discussion for Bull Run?
All right, Michelle?
Okay, thank you so much for all of the changes. I really was very impressed with reading through the Bull Run, the new draft. In fact, I had really only one particular comment, and it was a spelling one, actually, on page 34, the fifth line from the bottom. You have the word reservation when you really mean preservation.
Thank you.
But that is the only thing I saw in there that needed to be corrected. And I really appreciated all of the effort that went into reformatting and reorienting the entire document. It really, I enjoyed reading it. Thank you so much.
Good. I'm glad.
All right, thank you, Ms. Aubrey. Laser eyes for details there. Mr. Burns.
This is one I have not studied in the new draft, so I have no comments.
All right, Ms. Wan.
No comment.
All right, Mr. Kolinsky.
I'm not going to have a comment either at this point.
All right, Ms. Orr.
No comment.
All right, Mr. Plumpy.
Comment as well. I love Bull Run. Been there many times, but no comment at this time.
All right, Mr. Zellman.
I think it looks great. I agree with everyone. Nothing else to say.
All right, and you get to me, and I'm fairly aligned with everyone else. I agree wholeheartedly with Michelle. I think this section looks even more improved. I appreciate all the additional information you've added to it. I think it's, for me personally, this one obviously is not a district we get a lot of stuff going on in. So it's some of the other ones I think that they're really, I think I pointed out on this one that we're going to have a lot more discussion on some of the standards because they are ones that we come and clash with them quite more often. But yes, otherwise fantastic. So thank you.
Okay, we'll keep going, and we have Sully next. So Sully, here's just this. These are from the document, so you've seen them. We have the historic site, and then which part of the historic site is the district court, and then we have the overall boundary. The new maps identifying the historic properties, and those were identified in that 1991 memo. No contributing properties in the Sully HOD, and then non-contributing properties, and there's a number of them in the surrounding vicinity. So the district is 450 acres, including a quarter mile surrounding Sully, the historic site and district core boundary. The report incorporates findings and information from the HABS documentation, from the National Register documentation, the preliminary report or the staff report prepared when it was designated as an HOD, a 2005 Sully Historic Site Master Plan revision by the Fairfax County Park Authority, and that 1991 memo, as well as obviously the 1992 design guidelines. And it's consistent with the content and format of the Bull Run and Tallinn Hills. So here, just 2 pages from it. You've seen it. Here, ignore this map in the center, but the map has been updated. But just to give you a sense of the HOD and all the development that has happened in the vicinity, we have the Sully Historic House at the top left corner. We have a historic schoolhouse that was moved there at some point after the Fairfax County Park Authority got the site in the 1959. We have a reconstructed enslaved cabin on the site. And then as you go to the edges of the HOD boundary, you have a lot of commercial development that's taken place largely since after Dulles Airport was established nearby, and a more recent commercial development close to the entrance of the Sully Historic Site where the Wawa which you guys are probably very familiar with. So here's those aerials that I mentioned and that Mr. Burns mentioned earlier. Each, we have 1937, 72, and 2019. 2019, we can pull a 2021 from Google Maps, but these come from the Fairfax County Historical Imagery mapping website. So you can see the amount of development that's taken place since the HOD was designated in 1971. And I think it's really striking in Sully's case, just it's true in many of the historic districts, but the amount of development that's taken place, and reading through the original staff report where there wasn't really any development anticipated because lack of utilities in the area, and obviously could not have foreseen all the changes. And you can also see the new entrance to the historic park that comes from the north from Air and Space Museum Parkway. So the design guidelines, I skipped over the other sections, but they're all consistent with what was in the Bull Run. We have the preservation objectives, what guidelines can and cannot do, the standards for rehabilitation, guidelines for preserving setting, guidelines for preserving architectural character, and then guidelines for architectural compatibility for new construction and new additions. So that's what I have for Sully. I'm happy to pull up the document for specific questions, but open it up to you.
All right. We'll go around the horn again. Ms. Aubrey?
I admit that I have not yet read the Sully document, so I really cannot provide any suggestions to you at this point. Thank you.
All right, Mr. Burns.
Okay, this is the one I did go through, so I've got a whole slew of comments. So I don't know if you want to call up the document or not, just so I can show you what I'm talking about.
Sure.
On the
Give me
cover.
just 1 second.
Yeah. Cool. Okay. There you go. My first comment was on the cover. Perspective distortion, particularly in the upper left photograph. My architectural sensibilities get offended by that. And to a lesser extent, the photograph in the upper right has also got some perspective distortion. But that comment would apply to any of these things. And I made it before when you were talking about the overall guidelines. On page 3, you have the aerial photograph.
On page 3.
That's page 3 of the document.
Okay. Yes.
There. Okay. That aerial photograph. I went to Google Street View, and in 2018, Dulles Discovery 4 was complete. But it shows here as a bunch of mud, and you said that was a 2019 image. But in your presentation, the one that was labeled 2019 is a different photograph than this one. So if that's different, because you can see the pond is there, the entrance, what do you call it? Screening facility is there, and the big parking lot is there. But in the actual one, in the guidelines, it's just mud.
It's under construction.
Yeah. So that's clearly that's an earlier photograph. On page 5 at the bottom, there is a box of text there. At the very bottom, it says projects that do not review. I think the word require is missing there.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. And let's see. Can you go back one? Page 4. Again, this is a photo image thing that that in the PDF that we have, it's roughly washed out. That could perhaps use some Photoshop touch-ups there. And let's see, back to the page that includes the credits. And this is a general comment for all of the credits. And that is, these credits don't reflect the board ARB at the time that this will be published. These reflect the ARB at the time that you guys were contracted to do the work. I don't know what the county procedures are for crediting people appropriately, but I am no longer, for instance, chair of the ARB. So that's, and some people have come on that weren't in there, and some people have left who are there. So that, Nicole, that maybe is an issue that you need to consult with the county folks about. Finally, since I grew up in the Historic American Building Survey, buildings has an S on it. So wherever Historic American Building is written, it should be Historic American Buildings Survey. Okay. That's a simple, block and change thing. And that's I've seen that in captions. It was in the captions for the photos and the drawings and such. And then the last thing was something I spotted in your presentation that hadn't occurred to me before. That Wawa that you illustrated in there is actually outside the Historic Overlay District. So if you wanted to put in one of the newer buildings, I would suggest that, see, the Wawa is outside. I would suggest you include the child care facility, which we spent a lot of time on. And if you want to give an example of new construction within the Historic Overlay District.
And I will say you can clearly tell that the ARB had a role in reviewing that project, because I've never seen a Wawa or Chick-fil-A or whatever else,
Yeah, that was, I actually, they didn't need to come to us with that. I think that they were just kind of following our lead on the child care facility and attempted to be consistent. And then in your presentation, I don't know if this actually carries through into these PDF documents or not. You use the abbreviations DGS and DG. I assume that those are generally spelled out in the documents. You just simply abbreviated them in the presentation. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay, cool. Other than that, I really enjoyed reading through it. And one last thing, and this applies here in any other of these historic overlay districts that have truly historic buildings in them, like Sully, is that maybe there should be some reference to the Secretary of the Interior standards for restoration. Because when the Park Authority comes in and wants to do things to Sully, I think that we should hold them to that higher standard because of the significance of the property.
I can certainly add that.
Yeah, that's Nicole, I don't know, what contractually they're supposed to do, but I think that Sully is kind of for my mind, in Pohick Church or Woodlawn, when they're actually proposing changes to those structures we have blinders on, because so much of what we're doing is new construction in existing historic overlay districts, that we kind of overlook the fact that we're also responsible for faithfully protecting the character of the historic sites.
Well, and John, in Woodlawn, I mean, we have an NHL, so we were obviously, I think we were trying. I think it's a really good point that holding them to pointing out that higher standard in those districts where it exists, because we definitely held the trust's feet to the fire for quite a while on some of the stuff they brought to us.
Right, and the reason this came to my mind was in the most recent public meeting on the Holland Hills Historic Overlay District, there was some pushback from the community over the Secretary of the Interior standards for rehab about differentiation, because you could say that a 6/6 light double hung sash was differentiated from a traditional Holland Hills plate glass window, but I think that misses the point, and so that's what made me think of this. But then I looked at the Sully report, and then I began to think, well, wait a minute. There is a second set of standards. There's actually 4 Secretary standards for various things. And restoration is one that we should at least mention in these documents. That's my last comment. Thank you.
Thank you. I will say restoration is mentioned in the overall guidelines. It does give an example of a type of building that was preserved, reconstructed, restored, and rehabilitated. I think the rehabilitation standards were pulled in just from the zoning ordinance, using those standards. But I think we can definitely make a comment about some of these museum sites, especially about other treatments. So pull some more language in.
Thank you.
I was gonna say real quick, and I'll check, Laura's been leading this, but I'll check with her and see if she's been working with the Park Authority, just to see what their conversations are about that.
All right, that brings us to Ms. Swan.
Mr. Chairman, I have no comments.
All right, thank you. Mr. Kalinsky.
I think John has said everything. Thank you.
Ms. Orr.
I appreciate the close read, Ms. Aubrey and Mr. Burns.
All right, Mr. Plumpy.
Yes, likewise. No comments. I appreciate what you both have done. Thank you so much.
All right, Mr. Zellman.
No comments. Thank you.
All right, Mr. Burns stole a little of my thunder on obviously pointing out that the Wawa was not in there, though they definitely did. It was appreciative how much consideration they gave. I do think the child care facility is a great example of some of the work that was successful there. Also, I love telling these. One, I do really appreciate the zoning information in this. I think that this is general observation for all of these. Having that information is extremely helpful because that is a question that comes up more often than not when we are dealing with projects. I also find it amusing to see how close that building got built right next to the boundary of the HOD for the secure facility. It is literally just, had they built a cantilevered roof, they would be stretching into it, but somehow they just sit on the ledge. So that in itself is kind of shocking to me. I think in looking at the guidelines, the only thing that I probably had an observation on was that I know we talk about lighting in that recommendations, but I think I would love to have a little bit more emphasis on preferred types of lighting, downward lighting, obviously color in the sense that we would want something in the sense that is not and I'm not going to use all the right words here, but we try to stray away from those high blue intensity lightings. And I think that's one of the problems we have in particular with this district, as you point out with the development. There's a lot of light pollution surrounding SULLY, and obviously anything that comes in. I think that was one issue that we spent a lot of time talking about and Ms. Knockins would probably be able to speak to it a bit more, was the lighting of that child care facility in particular, obviously meeting their requirements for a child care facility, but also not making it a beacon, like some of the same with many of the other facilities. So, and hopefully, Nicole, we can get this to Ms. Knockins so that she can, hopefully she's getting these and we can encourage her to comment on this one, because this is a district, she had a lot of comments on that child care facility, I remember in the past.
Yeah, I'll keep trying to get a hold of her.
All right, I think that would just be my primary observation, is if we could perhaps, I know we talk about the height of light fixtures, but perhaps talk about maybe even recommending cutoffs and perhaps a particular intensity here. And I see that might be relevant for a few other districts where lighting does become a challenge.
Did you make specific recommendations for the child care center about the height cutoff and intensity that I can pull in?
It is possible we did. I would love to tell you that I remember.
Okay.
But John, you have an observation.
Yes. Actually, the Ferguson property on the backside is the one we spend a lot of attention on, the light poles in their parking lot and whether or not they might be seen from SULLY. And my recollection, again, if you go to Google Street View and look, there's relatively little lighting on the new access road that ducks in close to the Fairfax County Reserve. Is that 28? Is that Route 28? Yeah. But if you look, there are some overhead lights with cutoffs. Now, Fairfax County's general guidance on lighting does stipulate cutoff so that you don't pollute your light onto your neighbor's property. But when you get really tall lights and you get mercury vapor and sodium vapor lights, the bright blue and the orangey lights, that light tends to propagate. It's not a very polite light. It just seems to go everywhere.
And that's why I was looking at the guidelines, and I think it's page 44 of this. It says minimal outdoor lighting that does not impinge on the historic site. While I know we're trying to be flexible in our guidelines, I feel like we want to be a little bit more exacting, perhaps.
Sure.
And so I think, yeah.
And here's that Ferguson property, right? Or was it a different Ferguson property that you?
I don't know. John, do you remember that one?
Well, where is this now? I lost where we are.
That's okay. Don't worry about it. I will go back and look at some of the lighting options though, and flesh the recommended section out, especially to give more specific guidance.
Yeah.
Thank you. All right.
Hey guys, this is Joe Pompey. I was going to say that for the lighting itself, we should recommend photometric study as well as give a color value range that the lights want to be. Sorry, that we should look at the color range that they're suggesting, and we can comment on that too as well. The color range is the Kelvin level for lighting.
And there you go. And Joe's using the terminology that I was stumbling all over as an architectural historian was the and maybe no, and maybe that's something that we should recommend in the overall guidelines that maybe I wasn't seeing in there. It was about photometric studies and color ranges.
Exactly. Yeah. And of course the sharp cutoffs and so forth. But that's sharp cutoff is a generic term, but the photometric will prove its point. But and also maybe stated there that they must prove that the line of sight of these fixtures are not or minimized or not seen from the historical site view shed that we're trying to preserve. So, as John said, tall poles are not great because you're still seeing the light source, even that they are sharp cutoff. But it could be impossible to do, but try and minimize it as much as possible. Yes. That's all.
All right, thank you very much, Mr. Plumpy. I believe that takes us on to our infamous tavern.
Okay, screen.
Every time, I really every time I gotta say, I really want a beer at Drainsville Tavern. Every time.
Well, hopefully someday it'll be reopened for some, public use. I hope so. We helped with the HSR last year, and I know the Fairfax County was trying to find some resident curator for it. So hopefully one of these days. Okay, so Drainsville Tavern. Ignore the map in the center. It's an outdated map, but just to give you a sense of the buildings and the surrounding area. Obviously, we have the tavern, we have the McDonald House, the Leesburg Pike, and then some of the suburban development surrounding the site. So the district encompasses about 167 acres, and our report incorporates findings from the National Register nominations for Drainsville Tavern and Bloomfield/Holly Knoll. Also the HABS documentation and the historic structure report I just mentioned, as well as the 1991 memo and the 1992 design guidelines. Here are the aerials that show the district core, the overall boundary, and the development kind of timeline. You can see all the changes that have been made over time. Design guidelines are consistent with those you've seen for SULLY and Bull Run. Guidelines for preserving setting, architectural character, and new construction and new additions for architectural compatibility. So I had some questions from this one because I can't find any information on the Hammond House. I'm not sure if any board members are familiar with the Hammond House. We know it was demolished. We know it's on the maps. There are a couple of VCRIS properties in that vicinity, so I just am not sure. And I also did see a note from one of the board members that Holly Knoll's name was changed, but I don't know the background on that. So. But open to any other questions or comments as well. Those just were my questions.
All right. I will go for the board members again. Perhaps they have answers for this. Regrettably, I imagine Ms. Murray might have some perspective on some of this, and she's not here. All the more important that obviously you're giving us a chance to comment on this. So perhaps one thing that we can do is after the meeting, Nicole, share out those questions that Sarah had, just so Elise in particular knows that that's something we're looking for if we don't have any answer for anyone else. But otherwise, starting at the beginning, Ms. Aubrey.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I did read the Drainsville document just right before the meeting began. And my takeaway, I have a couple of questions about a few things. On page 19, there are several references to the golf course and mini golf and golf ranges. But the golfing has been gone from there for quite a number of years. So I'm wondering whether or not the references to golf should be removed. On page 20, there is a brief discussion about the contributing resources, and I feel that I think that the discussion should be a little more elaborated on why the 4 contributing resources are contributing. And this kind of leads into page 23, where there's a more in-depth discussion of some of the contributing resources, but it does seem to, with the McDonald house and the outbuildings and the McDonald barn, it seemed to me that it needs something more than just what's said there. I mean, it needs to explain what's the significance of these properties, because it's mentioned that these are 20th century properties, but that the Drainsville Tavern is from the 19th century. So, and these contributing resources came from that 1991 memo, which of course gives us no indication whatsoever about why they're important, other than that they met the 50-year rule. So I do think that it would be important to flesh out give more information to the readers about the historical significance of the McDonald house, its outbuildings, and the barn. The other thing in the references section, I noticed that there is not a reference and a URL to the 1972 Fairfax County document that is proposing the Drainsville Tavern Historic District. But I did notice that there were comparable references and links in other, in some of the other historic overlay documents. So I would suggest that you add that. And actually tied to that, I noticed there are URL links to a lot of different documents, but there's not a URL link to the 1991 memo, which is mentioned everywhere. So something to think about whether we should be adding that in or not.
I think those aren't available online, so I didn't have a URL. Laura did find the Drainsville Tavern designation report for me after searching for a long time in the files. It's not on the website, so that's why there's not a link for that one. And it's actually not a report that's consistent with the other reports for the other HODs, so I'm not sure if they would post it online. But I can follow up with staff to figure out.
We can, yeah, I'll mention it to Laura and I'll see. But yeah, if it's different, it's a good question. If you want to post it, maybe that's why it's not posted.
But thank you for those comments.
All right, Mr. Burns.
Again, this is a report that I haven't read in detail. I'll note that in the aerial photograph in the lower right, that would be the southeast corner of the boundary of the Historic Overlay District, buildings that we passed muster on some time ago are merely represented by mud. And so I don't know if there's a more recent aerial photograph that might be substituted there, but that's one comment. Then with regard to Michelle's comment about the 1991 document not being available online, maybe not put that online because somebody who's not happy with the current new guidelines will go and say, well, this is the way it used to be. Why can't I do it? Blah, 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 blah. So just be cautious about what you're willing to share. You want to avoid creating apparent conflicts of intent and purpose of what the new guidelines are trying to achieve. That's my own comment.
John, and maybe everyone can relate, I thought in our discussion last time about the historic and contributing is that we were just pretty much folding those into one universal concept and weren't going to try to differentiate them anymore because we were kind of fighting ourselves over this. And we literally got to the point that if they're contributing, they're contributing. So I don't know if there's any benefit in putting that list out there. If we've identified them as contributing, we're going to treat them as such right now, and we'll tackle it when we get to it. And we've done that in the past.
Okay.
But that was I'd have to go back and look
at
the
observation.
Yeah. We definitely I thought we hashed that out I think it was in your tenure.
Well, it wasn't just that. It was, all of these guidelines are from 1991, 1992 vintage is my recollection. And so, these are meant to replace them.
Oh, you were talking about putting out the entire 1992.
Right. Right. That's what I was referring to.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you, Mr. Burns. Ms. Swan?
Mr. Chairman, I have no comments.
All right. Mr. Kalinsky?
No comments either. Thank you.
Ms. Orr?
Nothing to say.
Mr. Plumpy?
No comment. Thank you.
Mr. Zellman?
No comments. Thanks.
All right. I agree. I have not had a chance to give this one the full read. This was the one I put off to the end. However, I will note page 5, you also have that same issue of projects that do not review, probably do not require. In looking at the aerial that John was talking about, one thing, I think some of those mud pits are actually the stormwater ponds that fell within the district. So that was something I was wondering about, because that was part of what we reviewed for this district a while back. Was we got, I think, 3 or 4 of the houses, which hopefully are built, I would assume by now, and it would be really nice to see them as potential examples. A quick glance, I didn't see them from that neighborhood, which is the bottom.
I think I was recently looking at those for another reason. I think, there is some stormwater ponds, but I think, I don't know if you can zoom in, but at the end of that cul-de-sac,
Yeah, there you go, right there.
There are some houses that are built now.
There are several houses that we extensively provided input on their design for, both front, back, and all.
This cul-de-sac. This one.
No.
Oh, this one.
Yeah.
Okay.
Right. I'm using my cursors if you guys can see it, but yeah, just kind of encircling that cul-de-sac there.
There are those 4 lovely stormwater ponds that can be seen from space, is what I feel like based on this now. But yeah, I definitely think those, as John was talking about, if we have some information on those, because we put a lot of input into the designs of those structures.
Yeah, we have photos that we can pull in. So.
Definitely. All right, and again, this is not one that I've had a chance to review extensively. Those were just my initial observations on that. I do think in this one, the only other major item I think is obviously, I think there is some landscape concern here or visual concern here, particularly with Leesburg Pike and everything. And so obviously I'm going to focus some of my observations on how we're maintaining and preserving that area, because this is a district that particularly has that as a feature. Mm-hmm. Otherwise, that's all I have. And it sounds like we didn't get an answer to some of your questions there, Sarah. But I definitely think Elise might have some wisdom on those. She truly does know all things Fairfax, it seems.
Okay.
I
Nicole,
remember
maybe I.
this-
Oh, sorry.
Yeah, specifically talking about Holly Knoll and the name change. So yeah,
Yeah.
Elise for sure would have at least that
And-
information.
I was just going to say, maybe I'll send you this PowerPoint so that you can just forward it along to everyone if they have follow-up questions.
That sounds good.
Great.
Okay.
I think that's the last presentation you had, right?
Yeah, so my last thing was next steps, how many days, and then the process, for finalizing some of these when we get to that point. So I just have these for discussion and next steps. Oh, but we will be coming back with additional groups of design guidelines. Laura's also coordinating some public meetings, figuring out what districts are most interested in. We need to have a couple separate meetings or just one meeting. I think she's been, and Nicole have been gauging interest. So we'll just keep that in mind as we come forward with additional documents for you.
Okay. And I think from what we heard, unless any other member has an observation, I think 30 days seems sufficient for everybody. I saw some head nodding around the room that seemed acceptable. So we would be getting comments back to Nicole. We don't have the same amount of days in February as we normally would. So actually like the 9th or something, I think, back to her, which I personally think is perfectly reasonable to get you comments back on these. I'm expecting that you'll probably be giving us more to weigh in on as well. I look forward to eventually seeing the rest of ones, and I have a feeling there's going to be some interest in those by the task force that I'm taking part in too, because those definitely seem to be something that folks are curious in. John, you had a comment.
Yeah, as a question for Sarah, would it be helpful for you to have these comments before the next ARB meeting, so that if there's something that might be easily changed, that you could do so before the meeting for the next batch? In other words, maybe only give us 3 weeks.
Well, if that's up to you, if you can get them to me in 3 weeks, that would be great. We haven't figured out the next date because we're starting Wellington and Holmes Run Acres, the date for the next group. So it might not be next month. I might not have them ready for you in 2 weeks, but I can always come back. So I would say a month is fine, and then we can, follow up the following month if needed.
Okay.
All right. Well,
Thank you.
the hope might be now that I think there's a lot of satisfaction with the format. I think it's more the individual content now. So hopefully we can get into a rhythm with some of the rest of them, because I think some of the later districts, as John observed, like with places like Woodlawn that have the certain properties in them, there's going to be a lot more interest in some of the challenges we might face there. Otherwise, thank you very much for the fantastic presentations. We appreciate all of your hard work. And my colleague, Bill Marzella at the ACHP, sends a hello to all his former colleagues at Traceries. He's going to see you all today.
Thanks. Tell Bill I said hello too. I miss him.
All right.
All right. Well, thanks, everyone. I really appreciate it.
Thanks, Sarah.
All right. This takes us on to our next presentation, Wellington at River Farm, Potential HOD.
Okay, let me just pull up my presentation. It's coming, I swear. There we go. Okay. All right. And this is the presentation that Laura is actually giving tonight at a planning commission committee, land use committee as an informational item. So it's her presentation. So just let me know if you have questions and I'll answer them as best I can. You guys see that okay? Do I need to make it smaller? Is that okay?
That's fine on my screen.
Okay. Okay, so this is obviously Wellington River Farm. The subject property is located at 7931 East Boulevard, and it's immediately adjacent to the George Washington Memorial Parkway, located in the Mount Vernon district. On November 17th, the Board of Supervisors requested the staff analyze the feasibility of the creation of a historic overlay district on the property. So in response to that, we are doing an analysis report to determine if there is historic significance, as well as a comprehensive plan amendment, a zoning ordinance amendment, and a board zone motion for rezoning to add the HOD boundary to the zoning map. So very similar to what will happen if Holland Hills or Homes or Acres go forward. We are also working on draft design guidelines that will accompany it, such as any other HOD, and traceries, as I mentioned, are working on that also. Okay. So this is the parcel. It's 24.69 acres, and it is currently planned for private recreation and zoned R2. There is a governing special exception on the property for a public benefit association, and it is currently owned by the American Horticultural Society. This slide specifically is showing two conservation easements that are located on the property. There's the National Park Service easement, about 2.2 acres in size, and it's located here on the western portion of the property. It's to preserve the view shed along the George Washington Memorial Parkway, or Highway, sorry. The second easement is owned by the Virginia Outdoors Foundation. That's this other easement over here. It is 8.15 acres, and both of the easements restrict the subdivision of the property within those boundaries. The site is located among residential uses to the east, obviously George Washington Memorial Parkway, and is bounded to the north by the Wellington subdivision. Also zoned R2. Obviously, you've got the Potomac River there to the east, and then you have the property below, which is, they're larger parcels, but they're also zoned R2. And then we've got this RPA, resource protection area, that is also located on the property. So I think some of you guys know some of this background. The site property was once owned by George Washington. It was part of his river farm. I think Laura may have mentioned the name the last meeting. Obviously, we're calling it Wellington at River Farm because obviously this is just a small portion of the George Washington property, and so the whole thing is not River Farm that we're trying to protect, obviously. So he gave a life estate on the property to Tobias Lear, personal secretary, and Lear and his family lived on the property until his death in 1816. However, we don't have a ton of information about the Washington ownership period of it. We haven't had an archaeological survey done yet, and so a lot of that information would come from that. And also, we don't have a ton of information specifically about who constructed the house and when, although we're getting some of that probably information from as we go through the process. So staff has determined that the period of significance for the property is between 1919 and 1973, which is the time that Malcolm Matheson owned it, and also the time where you see the renovations to the structures that exist today. Mr. Matheson made the modifications in the colonial revival architectural style, and you can see that on this structure here and a number of the other structures that are present on the property. Many of the features can be seen, as I said, on this one, but also on the ballroom, carriage house, and the caretaker's house. Mr. Matheson and his family were very busy in local ties in the Fairfax community. He was very involved in the nearby St. Luke's Church, and also his son was also involved in construction and development of some notable Fairfax County buildings, including the Mount Vernon Visitor Center and the McLean CIA building. The property was listed on the Fairfax County Inventory of Historic Sites in 1969 as Wellington / Washington's River Farm. So staff analysis. So in looking at the property, you can see the list here. There are 10 structures and or features that are considered contributing. Unfortunately, I realized on this map that she gave us, the letters aren't listed here for each of them, but the manor house is this first one here. The ballroom extends back on the other side, and then there's the various caretaker houses, garages, and then also Laura's included the view shed to the Potomac River, which is fairly intact from the time of Matheson. The non-contributing structures are the James Monroe gates, which are actually out here on the road. They were actually originally on the White House, and they were installed by Matheson. The Ha-Ha wall, which is not that old, and then you can see the other items that are also not of extensive age. So the proposed zoning amendment. So what they're saying is it's zoned R2, and staff reviewed existing by right, special permit, and special exception uses that may be appropriate for the district. Currently, the recommendations are that staff proposes to allow all uses to be permitted through an approval of a special exception by approval of the Board of Supervisors, except for animal-related, vehicle-related, and industrial uses. This allows the board to preserve historic resources without excluding potential uses that may be appropriate. And any new uses must demonstrate that the use be compatible with the structure, site, and surrounding properties, and that contributing structures be not altered or used in a way to negatively affect the significance. And also, they would limit the height of all structures to 35 feet. Rather than listing specific uses that can be permitted or prohibited, as we've done in some of the older HODs in the past, this will allow the Board of Supervisors to consider appropriate uses through the approval of an SC with standards that will preserve the existing character and the neighboring properties. This is patterned after the proposed new use in the alternative use of historic structures in ZMOD proposal, which you guys have been involved in. And the intent is to replace this with a ZMOD version. So once ZMOD is passed, it will be updated to that format. The proposed use limitations include a requirement that any use approved with a special exception utilize the existing historic resources on the property. It must be demonstrated that the use, including any proposed new improvements, additions, or structures, will continue to be in harmony with the district's specific purpose and intent for the Wellington HOD and be compatible with the structure, site, and surrounding properties. Staff recommends that the contributing structures may not be altered or used in a manner that would result in the removal of the property from the inventory of historic sites or remove it from HOD designation if that is so adopted. Staff believes that these limitations will incentivize current and future owners to preserve and adaptively reuse the existing contributing structures on the property. There will also be, as I mentioned, a proposed comprehensive plan amendment, but this is just an editorial change. It will just update the inventory listing to denote an HOD listing if that happens, and adding the boundary of the HOD to the comp plan map. Time frame, as you can see, and I think as you know, it's a very expedited time frame because obviously the property is up for sale. So obviously we've got our meeting tonight, and that's also Laura's at the Planning Commission Land Use Committee meeting. Then March 2nd, we're going to have a community meeting to present the findings, prepare the staff report, and then plan on going to the Public Commission hearing in March and Board of Supervisors in April. And then obviously design guidelines, which what's not included on here is obviously we will be back to the ARB on March 11th to be asking for a motion of support or what have you, if as appropriate. So with that, questions?
All right, I guess I'll just go around the room again. Ms. Aubrey?
Thank you. Really, I have just one question, and that is how it's interesting that the period of significance that the county is identifying is limited to the period of the owner directly before the American Horticultural Society. So what does that mean with regard to resources that are there before? I mean, earlier today I was reading the inventory, Fairfax County History Commission's inventory statement, the 2-page thing that Susan Hellman had put together back in 2009. And it talks about periods and activities and owners that are much earlier than Matheson.
Yeah, so that was some of the concern that staff had too. The problem is that because of the expedited timeline, they haven't been able to have any kind of archaeological survey done. But the staff report, as I know it at this moment, will recommend that before anything else happens, a survey is done. And I know Liz has been working on getting finding out how much that may cost, because obviously the board will want to know that. But yeah. It would be important to have that done before, if possible, but because of the expedited timeline, we're not able to do that, as I understand it. But I think the plan is hopefully to get the studies done, and also probably a cultural landscape study to identify any of those features and then update the HOD as necessary.
All right. Thank you, Michelle. Mr. Burns.
Yeah, I would second Michelle's comment about the narrowness of the period of significance. In looking at this, it strikes me as the county, more than anything else, seems to want to preserve the contiguous property. And in their rush to do that, they're just kind of glossing over changes that were primarily by a most recent owner prior to the American Horticultural Society. And it's important that we not get locked into only preserving his presence on the property. So that I'm thinking of Montpelier, where they had to peel away all of the DuPont accretions on that building to get back to Madison's original property underneath. So that I'm wondering if that might happen at some point in the future on this particular property. It's unfortunate that they scheduled the Planning Commission meeting coincident with our meetings. So I would have happily attended that had I not had this other commitment. That's all. Thank you.
Yeah, well, that one's just the land use committee, so make sure that the March 17th will be the actual planning commission too. So we'll remind you of that again in March when we're together.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Burns. Ms. Wan?
I'm not familiar with this area, and I think Mr. Burns asked this question 2 meetings ago, maybe. So for most of our historical district, we always have a historic contributing property, and then we have a boundary of a district. And my understanding from the presentation is, in this particular case, they are the same boundary. And the property is owned by one entity. Okay, I only have that question.
Map again there. So yeah, so this is all right now currently, yeah, it's all one property. And so yeah, that would be the boundary. There was some discussion if we wanted to do anything bigger, because, you know, again, a lot of the older HODs have that kind of big circle around them. But they felt that this would be an appropriate boundary for the potential.
About the other risk we ran if we did that was you were going to have to talk to those individual homeowners, and so due to the pressure put on trying to get this property in an HOD, the shape of the district was kind of restricted in that sense due to that rush. At least that's I remember that was the answer I think Laura gave to John's question last time. Was that, do you remember that, John?
Yeah, I do remember that. I also think part of the rush to get this thing protected by an HOD designation derived from not too many years ago, maybe just a year and a half ago, one of the brothers from the organization Five Guys, the hamburger outfit, bought a property close to this and tore down an historic house, and everybody is kind of aghast at that. But that house hadn't had any protections. And so there was really nothing, the guy was within his property rights to do that. And so I think when this one then came on the market, everybody was like, oh no, we're not going to have that happen again. And so there's this kind of rush to protection.
All right, Mr. Kalinsky.
Is there a organized resistance to this historic designation? I'm assuming the Horticultural Society does not want it because it will limit the value of their property.
I would, yeah, I have not heard of an organized resistance. Yeah, I think there might be some reticence on AHS, American Horticultural Society. I don't know all the details about that, but yeah, I assume it would be because obviously that could make it harder for them to sell the property. I haven't heard any updates. I know that they were only taking originally offers. It was in the news till a certain time in January, which is passed. So I don't know what they're.
And that was my next question. Is there any updates on any interest or what happens? What happens if the property sells before this whole process is complete?
I mean, as far as I understand it, I mean, obviously, if the process would continue to go through, would go through continue to go through the steps. Obviously, the new homeowner, if this passed, would then have an HOD on their property. I would assume that they would be told of that happening if they were putting in an offer. And there was the offer by, is it the Virginia Trust in the Parks, I think, they put in an offer to purchase it themselves. But again, I don't know what the offers are or who or may not have accepted it. And I should mention, and Michelle emailed me earlier this week asking a question about joining. Somebody from, I think, had emailed her and Elise about trying to help Save River Farm. And I did get an email today from somebody, I think from that same group called the Save River Farm Committee. And they wanted to know if the ARB would be a partner in the Save River Farm campaign. And they have a website, saveriverfarm.com/partners, so you can see who the other partners are. And I just got this email a few hours ago, so I can send this off to you guys. So I don't know if that's something that you want to discuss also.
Just curious to, just to see the reaction with this, historic overlay district being applied in such a quick manner. Okay. That's all I have to ask.
All right, thank you, sir. Ms. Orr?
Y'all have worked so hard, so fast. You're just impressive. You're on a roll. I don't have anything to say.
Okay, Mr. Plumpy?
Nothing to say either as well. Thank you.
All right, Mr. Zellman?
Nothing further, thank you.
I agree with John and Michelle that obviously it's kind of, I get the constraints that are under, but we are kind of shortchanging a portion of history. I think both the Horticultural Society and prior to our wonderful White House gate taking a resident, I think both those are important things, and I think definitely we need to have a plan for how that information will be readily updated then, because obviously we can update HODs rather easily, but we don't need to go, whew, we got it done. And, because I think there's a large aspect of landscape and archaeology and stuff that if it's overlooked here, we're going to be, while we may have an HOD, we could be at odds with the new owner for quite some time over the overarching perspectives of this property. I guess with the question about the Save River Farm item, I don't know if the ARB could really be listed in that type of fashion. I don't know if that's something we are able to do, signing on to little advocacy groups. I think there's some danger in that. If I'm no lawyer, but I feel like there's something in that we obviously, I think we are supportive overall on the board about the idea of an HOD, but I think that activism might be something we want to stray from. Jason, any observations?
Lawyers are the worst. Other than that, a lot of the times, when you think about it's actually really more analogous to a judge on a case on whether they have a conflict. You're always trying to avoid the appearance or a perception problem, and if this is something that we're going to potentially be involved with regulating over time, being a partner in making it happen, I don't think is the right appearance.
And I just pulled up the list, and several of our chairman of our board of supervisors, Supervisor Stork, as well as several state senators are individuals, and then from organizations, our history commission is a member, but they operate in a very different fashion. A lot of garden clubs, quite a lot of garden clubs, and some other historical societies, without a doubt. But I feel like I think that's the best. Jason's observation is the best advice. We're doing our job. And when the question comes to us, we'll do our job. And when the property comes to us, we'll do our job. Any other observations on that position from any other members? Or
could I chime in here? Since I was the one that brought it to Nicole's attention, I only knew about this because I was blind copied on an email between two other individuals. And there was an effort on the part of the History Commission by a member of the History Commission, but not by the chair, to try and get the ARB to also sign on as a friend to save the river farm. And I felt, well, if the History Commission wanted to do that, they wanted to become a friend of River Farm. That was their business. And if they wanted to ask other organizations, then maybe their chair should be asking other organizations, but not to be doing it kind of under the table. And when I went to the website, just as you did, Christopher, and I saw that all of the organizations were like friends groups of this, that, and the other. And other than the county and state people, there were really no larger groups there. Now, that doesn't mean that the ARB wouldn't be supportive of it, because obviously the ARB is supportive of it, because the heck, the ARB is through Mr. Stork preparing the plan, proposal for a historic overlay district. So that obviously means that the ARB members have not disagreed with Mr. Stork. We're obviously supporting him, although we haven't actually come right out and said so. I don't think there's a necessity for the ARB to become a friend, and I would actually be concerned about a kind of a quasi-government agency such as our own to be a friend, because that would mean we'd be buying off on what a lot of other people are doing without our ability to have any control over it. And that's maybe my own personal experience, having been a federal government employee for 32 years, that you just don't do that kind of thing. But I just wanted to clarify that I was not suggesting to Nicole that the ARB become a friend. I was just passing along some information that I had gleaned from somewhere else.
Thank you.
Sorry, I hope I didn't insinuate that. I just was saying that I'd heard it from Michelle, and then today I got an email from somebody. And just so I know, since this person emailed me, am I allowed to email them back on your behalf, or should I send that to you guys and Chris or somebody will email them back? I'm not sure of the proper.
I want to hear John's observation. He's got his hand up, and then I think we can give you an answer.
Okay. My observation is that if you agree to support one friends group, where do you stop? For instance, just a mile and a half from that spot, there is the Friends of Holland Hills. Should we sign on to that? And Nicole, you have experienced that there's some yin and yang in the support from that community. And if we were to sign on to the Friends, in support of their advocacy for listing Holland Hills as an HOD, we immediately alienate those people who are currently opposed to it. So, or if there was a Friends of Association drive, do we need to stick our nose in that tin? I think it would be unwise.
No, and I agree with John, and I think that ties neatly into Mr. Zellman's observation that we kind of are in a judge-like position if this ever is an HOD, and we have our role in the process and making our recommendation up to the Board of Supervisors. I am happy to convey back that I appreciate their interest in bringing that to our attention, and I think I'm fine with you conveying that as well, Nicole, if you want. You can even mention we talked about it during this meeting since it's going to be online. And I think that gets into Mr. Kalinsky's point about understanding opposition and interest in this, and that it's good to know that there are groups that are actively interested in promoting this as a thing that should be saved. There are channels in which they can make their voice heard that will come up in the process, and they should empower themselves as they are supposed to make sure that occurs.
Okay, that sounds good.
You've got like 3 feds in this board, so we're all like, I'm going to say nothing without saying anything at the same time. And then Nicole, it too, so.
Yeah, totally. Okay, so I'll respond to them and let them know that it was discussed and that they can also follow the conversation if they need more information online.
Thank you for letting us know, and we appreciate and look forward to their participation in that process as it moves forward.
Yeah, and as I mentioned, as Laura has explained to me, we'll come back next month, and I think what she was saying is that would be when, if you guys were to make a motion of support, that would be then. So there'll be more of us.
That might be a valuable thing to convey to, obviously, because this is going to be kind of like a dry run for when we get to Holland Hills eventually, potentially, is we're going to afford an opportunity for comment during that window when we take up that motion, correct? So that would be the time when folks would want to say something, whether opposed or for it. Otherwise, yeah, I think just pass that all along, and we'll look forward to it. Already March. Jeez. Okay.
Yeah, somehow 2021 cruising by.
All right. Well, let's move on to board and staff items and see how efficiently we can tackle those. Review and action on approval of the previous month's minutes. Are there any comments or revisions that had to be provided? Mr. Burns. I'm holding on bated breath now. Oh, we can't hear you now, John.
Here, I can unmute him. Okay, John. Oh no, you muted yourself. Okay, hold on. No.
Nope.
It keeps muting you.
Stop.
You got okay. There you
Okay. Okay. Sorry about that. My mouse just disappeared. What were we talking about? Oh, the minutes.
The previous month's minutes, and
yes, I had 2 comments. I believe they were on page 10, which I have emailed to Nicole.
All right. With those comments in mind, and hearing no other comments, I would look for a motion to approve with revisions as well as pay the recording secretary.
I would move that we approve the minutes as amended by me, and that we approve payment to our recording secretary.
All right, we have a motion. Is there a second?
Second.
Seconded by Mr. Kalinsky. All those in favor, say aye.
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 All those opposed, nay. Hearing none, the motion passes. Treasurer's report.
Okay, so treasurer's report. As of February 1st, the balance is $20,581.81. Is that all I have to tell you about that?
I think that's all you have to tell us about that right now.
Great.
All right. Next, administrative. I don't see anything in that item. No administrative items. Discussions, updates, and reports. Soapstone connector.
Yeah, and so I believe I sent you guys the latest update from the agency. And so as you guys know, they had done the 4F process. And so now they are working on, obviously it's an adverse effect determination. And so they're going to start moving forward on, I guess, starting consultation on an MOA. I haven't heard anything since that last thing that I forwarded. So, but we should be looking forward to a lot of discussion on that, and hopefully some important mitigation along the way.
Okay, and I know in the previous letter that John and I worked on developing, we conveyed our expectation of looking forward to that and highlighted a few potential opportunities. So I guess, I mean, my personal impression of the letter was thanks for letting us know, but there's not much more to say at this moment until they start giving us something to talk about.
Agreed. Yeah.
All right. Homes Run Acres, HOD?
Yeah. I feel like this is just like me talking for the next 10 minutes on all of these. Homes Run Acres, we had our meeting in January. We got another kind of, we brought the project managers, Carmen and Casey, in to talk about ZMOD. Homes Run Acres has had a lot of questions about how ZMOD specifically, how I mess this one up every time. It is the ALUs, not ADUs, but the not affordable dwelling units, accessory, thank you, Ryan, accessory living units.
Accessory, yeah.
And how there's a change, a proposed change in ZMOD that would make that some of those could be administratively approved instead of having to go through, is it special exception or special permit to do that. And so they've had some concerns about that. So that was a discussion with Carmen and Casey. And then also we talked, we brought Traceries in to do their beginning discussion on design guidelines, because as Sarah mentioned earlier, they're also doing the design guidelines for Homes Run Acres, which is great because that's just going to keep everything kind of looking the same and feeling the same and kind of following the same pattern. Our next meeting is February 24th at 6:30. So we'll be continuing the discussion on contributing and non-contributing, and then also looking at boundaries. There's not as many parks and other properties in Homes Run Acres as there is with Holland Hills. There is one park on the north end of the property, and so we'll be talking about that. And then also there are some structures on Executive Drive at the south end where it meets Gallows Road that are not Homes Run Acres homes, but they are small. A lot of them are kind of Cape Cod-ish structures. And so when we first started this process, some of the folks said they wanted to talk about maybe including those as not contributing because it would buffer up again to Gallows Road to kind of keep the neighborhood, those small single family dwellings. So that will be part of the discussion that we're having in a couple weeks.
Okay, thank you. Any comments, observations on this one from board members? Mr. Burns.
Just one thing, Nicole, there's one Dan Kiley designed landscape in, did I send that to you?
Yeah, and
Okay.
I tried to find it, and I can't remember. I think I sent you. Did I send you what I got back from? They have kind of a historian in Homes Run Acres, and I think I forwarded it on to you because he had found some stuff. But remind if I didn't, I'll forward it on to you.
Okay,
He had
thank
something
you.
on it, I think. Oh, I know what it was. It was because the numbers, the house numbers had changed. And so you had the original house number, and he has a list of what the changes were. So hopefully that would help you tie it down.
Okay.
Okay, that's exciting. Okay, thanks for keeping us updated on that one. Holland Hills.
Holland
Adrian.
Hills. So we had the community meeting in late January, which I know John was at, and obviously Sarah was at too. And I think Chris, you were attending, and Jason, I think, also attended. It was a lively discussion. A lot of questions about the design guidelines and how they may all work. It feels like the same kind of level of concern that we've had from kind of both sides of the coin, those that are in favor and those that are maybe not so much in favor. There were some questions about how it could affect your mortgage insurance and also your mortgage in general. People were concerned that it would end up costing them more money to live there. So
Yeah,
I think
that was the item that kind of bothered me the most, and I thought there was a commitment from the county to try to dispel some of that, well, get some information on that, which in my understanding, would dispel the majority of that, as that is not typically how designations and historic districts work for properties. And I really do, I think that is something that is critical in my mind to kind of combat disinformation. I am completely sensitive to the fact that some folks may or may not want a historic overlay district, but I think the premise that being listed when the National Trust has published extensive information on the benefits of listing, and the benefits it has to home values, and the benefit it has to the community from a safety perspective, from a growth perspective, from a health perspective, those all things are pretty well publicized, and I hope that the county can kind of share those resources so that those questions aren't, I'm sensitive to that, but I think they need to be, there are answers to those. So hopefully we can convey those.
Yeah, I agree.
Yes, Mr. Burns.
Yeah, yes, those concerns were expressed. I did some research and all that on that topic of homeowners insurance being affected by this, property values being affected by this. And if you look at all of the articles that have been published, they're talking about not recent past buildings. They're talking about old, not recent past buildings. And they're talking about the cost of replacing a slate roof. They're talking about elaborate wood carvings and mahogany doors and glass doorknobs and virtually all of the materials that were used in the construction of these houses are still available today. This is not exotic construction that requires any special exotic craftsmanship. You don't have to have specially milled profiles for your trim because there's no trim. I mean, so those arguments are fear-mongering arguments, and they don't hold water in that particular neighborhood. The same would be true if you get those arguments in Homefront Acres, that these buildings are all recent enough that the materials are still available.
And I think, John, what I was kind of getting at is I felt like there was, and this is probably because the county's not used to the influx of HODs. We got our HODs, then we added on Centerville, and we just kind of coasted, honestly. And we have never really had one to the scale of these proposed ones either, which I think there's a lot of communication that has to be done to citizens who reside in an HOD like this, to understand what that means and what that implies. And I think that also stemmed from the concern that was raised on the other side of it, that the local review board is extremely prescriptive about what this is very strict about what you can do, and then talking about the standards not being as restrictive. And that ironically is the intent of the standards, is to provide flexibility from the rehabilitation perspective in particular. But there was also that challenge I saw with how those two entities work with each other. And I know the county can't comment on what that one entity does, but I think we could still observe that we have other times where, I thought in particular, I mentioned this last time with Laurel Hill, many of the Lorton organizations provided their input or comments on proposed activities. And the applicants even said, we talked to this board first, or this civics group first, before we came to you. That is all information that could be provided as part of an application to the ARB. Just the same as someone coming to us and saying, we met with VDHR. I mean, there's nothing wrong with bringing additional information. But I think what I'm getting at is I think we may need to look, particularly when we're starting to look at homes run as well, how do we, kind of package this to a neighborhood? This is what it means. Because in the past, I think we've just been working with a small collection of homeowners, and saying, well, guess what? You're in a historic house. It's pretty obvious every day when you go there. Well, now we've got a different collection of folks.
Yeah, I know that what Laura's planning on doing for Holland Hills is keeping comments open. I think she mentioned at the end of the meeting until I think it's going to be a month from there. So kind of almost to the end of February. And then we're going to make sure that all of the questions are answered and posted up on the website. So trying to combat some of that misinformation for sure.
Well, I see in other places now, I know we're updating the guidelines, but sometimes there's even like a small page pamphlet handout that, so you live in a historic district. You know, it's something that you can give a resident, and that might be something that, you know, we may need to, in the past, it's just been the postcards that we've sent out. We may need to think for, if we start to get districts of this scale, there might need to be something a little bit more helpful to hand out to a homeowner who actually comes into this environment.
Yeah, no, we have a frequently asked questions that we've used at the community meetings, but maybe repackaging it into something like a pamphlet that's like super easy if these go forward, so that it is.
I merely say that because
scary.
when I worked at Fort Belvoir, we did that for every quarters residence at the installation for all the families that moved in every time they changed out. And that was mostly to handle questions about, I hate this part of my house because it's old. Or or I have lead-based paint windows, are they safe, or something like that. But it was meant to answer a lot of questions that come with living in a historic home. I could see a different version of that being, here's what it means that you own a historic home and in a overlay district. So just an observation. All right, River Farm. I feel like you've updated us enough on that one.
I hope so.
All right, Gum Springs.
Gum Springs. Okay, so let me pull up. Denise sent me some information. Okay, so Gum Springs project is in a slight holding pattern until after the Mount Vernon District Town Hall, which was last Saturday. So the project is being funded by a carryover budget request made by Supervisor Stork last year to fully fund an architectural study and complete a state PIF, which would be the first step for a National Register nomination. And the Supervisor's Office will be creating a community group to advise on the project. They have not set up a web page yet. But if you want any information, obviously you can contact Denise about that.
All right. I don't see any hands up or observations. So let's move right on to the Reston survey.
Reston survey, which you know a ton about. So they're expecting the final draft from the consultant on the Reston survey any day. Once it's received, it will be posted on the Reston survey project webpage. As a reminder, the project was partially funded by a cost-share grant from the Department of Historic Resources, and the survey results will be presented at the ARB meeting in March and to the Reston Master Plan Task Force sometime in April. And the survey will be used as a planning tool by DPD staff in the development review process. And again, please contact Denise if you have any questions, or Chris can probably speak to any of them too.
Now, I'm just excited that there seems to be momentum in the Reston Task Force to incorporate this into that update. Initially, when Samantha and I and staff went and talked to the supervisor, it was not seen as a priority, and then the Reston survey took off, and I think we actually benefited from the pandemic slowdown because it slowed the comprehensive plan update down, and so we were able to catch up to them. So slow and steady wins the race on that one. Rezoning cases.
Any questions? And then the ones on the list that were there, I don't have any that are charging ahead at the moment. Any of the ones that I've had are kind of on hold, so I don't know if anybody had any questions about any on the list.
No, I'll just make an observation of one I saw on the list, and then the South County site-specific plan amendment. I note that the redevelopment of the Bellevue Shopping Center was withdrawn after local resistance. So I'm glad to see that.
All right. Any other discussion or updates?
I had one more thing to mention that Denise asked me to mention to you all. So looking forward, we are hoping to apply to the state's grant programs this year to complete a context study of the county's African American history along with a county-wide architectural survey. It's a large project, and we may end up needing to distribute the work over 2 years in grant cycles. And I think she wanted to know, and I don't think you have to obviously make the decision, but maybe it's something we talk about. The next meeting is if the ARB also wanted to put in some funds to help complete that. So.
I mean, I saw a few heads nod already. I think we're always in support of identifying new county properties. Mr. Kalinsky.
Just sorry, I don't know if I'm the proper time to interject, but I did have a meeting with the Fairfax County Parks Association for the Laurel Hill restroom building that we had approved with the preformed metal insulated panels, the modern look, and the red color scheme to match the existing picnic shelter that was on site. A lot of pushback from Lorton Heritage and South County on the design, on it being modern, and they predicated that modern design on I think Mr. Plumpy's comments from 2015. So we ended up having a pretty productive meeting, and we've charged the architect to come back with a new design, a modern design, not to stray too far, but look at more prison-centric materials. So rather than the prefab or the metal insulated panels, they're probably going to be coming back with some sort of masonry product. And I think they may play down some of the kind of more unique contemporary columns and things like that. So that's my update.
Thank you, Mr. Kalinsky.
I expect that they will come back in front of us again.
I appreciate you taking the time to do that individual assistance with them.
You're welcome.
Nicole, I think it's definitely I think the big, getting to your question about funds, I think the question would be, how much funds can we delegate? Because we do have to pay the bills to keep the lights on here and keep the webcams running. So it would be a question of what we could give, because I think we've done that in the past, but it's been within whatever's our means.
And I can talk with Denise about, because obviously it's early on, but like where they're getting and how much they're getting from where, and so what would be a reasonable amount too.
And I think if it's a question of a letter as well, that's something we've always been happy to do too. To if it's matching and getting support, that's always something we're happy to do. And I'm happy to pen. All right. I guess any other correspondence, announcements, or old business? We had the update from Mr. Kalinsky. Any other members? Mr. Burns.
This would actually be new business, and that is Preservation Virginia has put out a call for nominations to Virginia's most endangered historic places. And this subversive part of me is thinking Association Circle. I don't think it would be prudent for us to do it, but I just wondered, I wanted to get a sense of the board as to whether or not, if that appeared on a Virginia's most endangered historic places list, would that benefit us or be a curse to us? And the reason I'm asking is I have other avenues that might nominate it.
So this is my observation, John. After attending the meeting that we did, Sam and I think we obviously made our case that the county, the Department of Transportation, the county's Department of really messed up with this property identification. We've tried to stand on that the process was there to take place. And we've gotten that it clearly indicated that this is a property. And now we're going through the process to resolve those effects. Obviously, the acknowledgement is that they can't avoid it. So I don't know if it, in my opinion, benefits us to continue poking that wound from our angle. I do agree, and actually, when you said it, I actually thought of Reston in general. That it is an at-risk area because of all the development. In general, seem to strike me as not just Association Drive is just the next in a domino set if we look at the API. So, and now we're identifying properties, but how many more of those might be slated for potential demolition in the future?
Right. I had also thought about Isaac Newton Plaza or whatever it's called, and the fact that the original Gulf Reston building is there, the original Reston Association building is there, and the plans that I have seen of it they're going to save some of the mature trees, and that's about it. And so, you know, that part of Reston, that commercial core, there was, I think they called it the industrial core, but that part of Reston is being wiped out. And it's the access of the Dulles Toll Road, and now the really major pressures coming in the vicinities of the Wheelie Avenue and other Silver Line stations. But it's, you know, it's basically, and that was one of the comments I had about the Reston survey, was that it ignored the most threatened buildings, which is that commercial core, the county-owned buildings, and the commercial buildings. Focusing on the residential, those are the least threatened buildings in Reston.
I think you and I had some similar comments to them.
Yeah. So anyway, so I was thinking about, but I like the idea of maybe a broader assessment of Reston under threat, because it is recent enough that it doesn't fall under the traditional 50-year rubric, which we saw in the Reston survey. You know, it's like, oh, it's not 50 yet. So, well, come on, it's. I mean, so anyway, that was a concern. I just wanted to get a bit of feedback from you all on that.
Well, and that's just my view, obviously. I would look to any other members if they had an observation to make to John. I don't want to speak for all of you.
I'm totally agree with you. Reston is in danger. I know Mr. Alcon's idea for Reston is the block above and below, north side and south side of the toll road is going to be a high density. And that's why we start to see the Associated Circle and Isaac Newton Square that going to change and become a really dense high-rise building. And his promise is, besides of this block, the rest of the area will keep it as residential. But now we start to see the ZIMA change. I do not know how much that is. The most of the people start to concern that gonna change the residential area quite a bit. Do not know how long it's gonna take, or it will take or not. So it all in all, I agree with you. We already see it's already changed a lot, like within this 5-10 years. So
it sounds like, John, at least you can make a case for it's just like ranch houses back in the day, where now it's the industrial commercial properties that are now under threat. Because you're right, even with plot properties like Holland Hills, even though if they may or may not become an HOD, there's a strong will to protect those very, you know, even though they're younger historic properties. But these misfits of, you know, and we saw that with the 50-year rule response. Oh, they're not 50, so they're not yet eligible. And I go, I had the comment of, why? You're talking about a year. It's going to take you a year to publish the report. So why not just call them eligible now? All right. Well, any other new business for members? How about that Super Bowl, right? Everyone got some oatmeal. Okay, well, if there is no further new business, then I would look for a motion to adjourn.
Mr. Chairman, I move that we adjourn the February 11th meeting of the Architectural Review Board.
Thank you, sir. Motion to adjourn is always in order. All those in favor indicate by saying aye.
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 Aye. All those opposed? Yeah, that's what I thought. Motion passes. Thank you, everybody. Have a wonderful evening. We'll see you all next month.
Thank you, everybody.
All
Hi,
for
everyone.
getting in.
Thank you,
Appreciate it.
Nicole.
Thank you, Nicole. Appreciate it. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Good meeting, Nicole.
Thanks. Couple little hitches, but we'll get it. And thanks to Ryan for correcting my zoning terminology. Thanks, Ryan. Bye. Bye, guys. Thank you.